Hello, and welcome to the Ranger's unit of the week. And today we're taking a look at the M5A1 Stuart light tank. With the Americans being on the other side of the pond and seeing events in Europe unfold, they saw that their current tank arsenal wouldn't really be up to snuff in a modern European war, and so they sought about improving it. In the light tank department, their current light tank was the M2. They decided to upgrade this to the M3 Stuart light tank in early 1941. However, the M3 Stuart used an aircraft engine, which in the early 40s was in pretty high demand for some reason. It would be better if it could use an automobile style engine. It'd also be a little bit easier to operate on. And so they got a twin Cadillac V8 engines, mounted it into a new hull structure. This new hull structure, one of the main improvements being a proper fully sloped frontal armor, and you got the M5 Stuart. However, they did make a few M3 Stuarts with the airborne engine with the M5 Stuart hull. That would be the M3A3, and a lot of Commonwealth countries would end up using this tank. It would produce over 8,000 M5 Stuart tanks, and it would see action on all fronts by all sorts of nations throughout the Second World War. It was a pretty popular export tank. However, one of the main problems with the M5 and M3 Stuart was by 43, 44, the 37mm gun wasn't really up to snuff. And by the later stages of the war, these Stuart tanks would slowly get phased out and replaced with the new American light tank, the M24 Chaffee. In-game, the M5A1 is a 30-point light tank, available to the Russian 184th and Group Turania, the American 3rd US Armoured, 2nd Infantry, Task Force 45 and Task Force Butler, the French 1st and 2nd Divisions, and it has two weapons. First weapon is the M6 37mm cannon with 80 AP shots and 64 high explosive shots. Has a rather poor penetration of only 70mm, 50% accuracy, 1.25 kilometer range, and a rather low rate of fire of only 7 rounds a minute. The high explosive shells are also pretty poor, but that's to be expected. It's a 37mm cannon. It's not exactly the biggest of booms. However, you do have not one, but two machine guns, which gives you a decent amount of infantry or anti-infantry fire support. Down to miscellaneous stats, you have 55mm of frontal armor, strong top armor, 30mm at side, and 30mm at back. You go 44 kilometers off-road, 58 kilometers on the road, have medium stealth and very low optics. In battle, the M5A1 is a pretty nice little light tank, and surprisingly enough, it's going to be doing light tank things, which is not killing medium or heavy tanks, because by God, that cannon is pretty lackluster in the anti-tank department. You're really only going to be using it to try and knock out other lightly armoured vehicles, and heck, even in the critical hit stunning role, it's not exactly the Stuart's strong point. It only has a 7 rounds a minute cannon, which isn't terrible in regards to standard tank cannons, but in comparison to, example, some of the Russian light tanks with their 45 mils, or the extreme examples, some of the British light tanks with their 2-pounder guns with 15 rounds a minute fire rate, the Stuart is a little bit lackluster in that regard. However, the Stuart's main role isn't really trying to deal with other armoured vehicles. Its main benefit, well, it has multiple main benefits. The first one and main one being it has 2 machine guns, which is pretty good for a 30-point tank. It's usually only, more mid-range tanks which get that 2 machine gun luxury, and that allows you to stun up enemy infantry rather effectively. You're also relatively mobile, not the fastest light tank in the road, but at 44 kilometers an hour off-road speed and 58 kilometers on the road, it does give you a good amount of mobility to try and maneuver out of danger and maneuver around danger so you can flank. And also you have decent armor really for 30 points. I mean, the 45 to 55mm of frontal armor isn't going to do a whole lot against actual proper tanks, but against autocannons, anti-tank rifles, if you actually come up against them, or other light cannons, it does give you a shot of rail not getting blown up by a single shot. The Stuart is definitely a worthwhile tank with the divisions it's available for, as the majority of the divisions which have the Stuart, especially a lot of the Western Allied runs, don't have any other light tank options within those divisions, so you're gonna have to make do with the Stuart. And the Stuart is not a bad tank to be forced upon you for the light tank role, as you already have a decent amount of anti-tank within the majority of the divisions where the Stuart is available, so it's very useful for just cheap infantry support. I also want to give a shout out to the Stuart Mark V, which is the British Commonwealth M5A1. It's very similar to the M5A1 Stuart, just has slightly worse armour and a slightly different ammunition loadout, but practically it's the same tank. Overall, the Stuart is just a good infantry support light tank. For 30 points, you really cannot go wrong having 2 bloody machine guns. And in the other categories, it may not be the best anti-tank or the most fastest, but it has relatively good all-around stats with all things considered. I think it's a very good reason why the Americans ended up building a load, apart from the fact they had absolutely insane industrial capabilities during the 1940s. But yeah, it's just good. I recommend it. And well, I'm gonna leave it off at that. This has been another Rank Unit of the Week. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And as usual, please just take it easy.